There are places in human history that seem to defy logic, sites so ancient and so mysterious that they challenge everything we think we know about civilization. Hidden for millennia beneath a dusty hill in southeastern Turkey lies one such place. When archaeologists uncovered it, they realized they were not just looking at an ancient ruin, they were staring at a discovery that could rewrite the very origins of human society. This is Göbekli Tepe. Built over 12,000 years ago, Göbekli Tepe predates the pyramids of Egypt by thousands of years. It stands older than Stonehenge, older even than the birth of farming itself. At a time when humans were thought to be simple hunter-gatherers, living in small bands and surviving off the land, someone carved towering T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 20 tons, and arranged them in great stone circles. These pillars were decorated with intricate carvings of animals, lions, snakes, vultures, and creatures both real and symbolic, as if telling a story that we can no longer fully read. The mystery is staggering. Who were the people capable of such a monumental task when there was no metal, no wheels, no written language, and no permanent cities? How did they move such massive stones? Why did they choose this remote hilltop? And perhaps most importantly, what purpose did this place serve? Göbekli Tepe is not just an ancient ruin. It is a challenge, a riddle from our distant ancestors, daring us to reconsider everything we know about the dawn of civilization. And tonight, we will attempt to unravel that riddle. Who built Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago? When you first set foot on the dusty plains of southeastern Turkey, the land feels ancient in a way that is almost unsettling. The horizon stretches wide and dry, broken by low hills and scattered stones, a landscape that has seen the rise and fall of countless peoples. Yet hidden beneath one of these hills, for thousands upon thousands of years, was a secret so extraordinary that even the archaeologists who uncovered it struggled to believe what they were seeing. This secret was Göbekli Tepe. Imagine the year, not 5000 BC, not 3000 BC, but around 9600 BC, over 12,000 years ago. At this time, humanity was not supposed to be capable of grand architecture. The common belief among historians had always been that before the invention of farming, people lived as small nomadic bands, wandering from place to place, hunting wild animals and gathering roots and berries. No cities, no temples, no great monuments, just survival. And yet, on a lonely hilltop, someone built a place that seems to belong to another age entirely. Archaeologists uncovered massive stone pillars shaped like the letter T, some towering over 16 feet high, weighing as much as 20 tons. These were not crude rocks dragged into position. They were carefully quarried, carved, and arranged into great circles. On their surfaces were carvings of animals, wild boars, fierce lions, deadly snakes, vultures circling above, each one so precise, so deliberate, that it told a story in stone. But the most shocking truth was not just the beauty of these carvings, it was the age. Carbon dating revealed that Göbekli Tepe was constructed thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt. In fact, it stood nearly 7,000 years before Stonehenge. To put this into perspective, when the first bricks of the Great Pyramid were laid, Göbekli Tepe was already more ancient to them than the pyramids are to us today. That realization alone sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. If true, it meant that our entire timeline of human civilization, the neat ladder of progress from hunter-gatherers to farmers to cities to temples, was wrong. But how could it be? How could people with no metal tools, no wheels, no written language, no beasts of burden to haul heavy stones, create something on this scale? Even today, moving 20-ton blocks of stone requires careful planning and heavy machinery. And yet, 12,000 years ago, ordinary humans, or perhaps not so ordinary, found a way. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that religion, monumental architecture, and organized society only came after agriculture. Here, the evidence seemed to scream the opposite. Long before people settled down to plant wheat and domesticate animals, they gathered to build temples. Long before permanent villages dotted the land, they raised pillars that touched the sky. It suggests that belief, myth, and ritual might have been the spark that drew people together, not farming. And so, standing among the stones of Göbekli Tepe, you are not just visiting a ruin. You are staring into a mirror of deep time, a message from ancestors who were far more capable, far more imaginative than we have ever given them credit for. But the real question remains, the one that keeps archaeologists awake at night. Who built Göbekli Tepe, and why? The first archaeologist to truly grasp what was hidden under that unremarkable hill was Klaus Schmidt, a German researcher working in the 1990s. When he and his team began digging into the mound, locals called Potbelly Hill, they expected perhaps a medieval cemetery or a Byzantine ruin. What they found instead was a series of colossal stone circles buried intentionally under tons of backfill. Each excavation season revealed more of these T-shaped pillars, standing in deliberate patterns, some encircled by smaller stones like guardians. Schmidt quickly realized he had stumbled onto something that didn't fit into any existing box of human history. He later said, "This was the most unbelievable thing I had ever seen. It was a Stone Age cathedral." Think about that phrase for a moment. A cathedral, built long before there were cities, before writing, before kings or priests in the way we imagine them. The people who raised these stones were not supposed to be capable of such vision. They were supposed to be chasing herds of gazelle, crafting flint tools, and moving on when resources ran out. Yet here they were, carving enormous pillars, decorating them with reliefs, and arranging them with architectural precision. Something drove them to come together again and again to build. And this was no small task. Imagine trying to coordinate dozens, maybe hundreds of people with nothing but stone tools and ropes, no carts, no oxen to pull the weight. You'd need to quarry the stones from bedrock, shape them into precise forms, haul them across rough ground, and then raise them upright into sockets carved into the floor. This requires planning, leadership, cooperation, and above all, motivation. What could possibly compel groups of hunter-gatherers to invest so much effort into something that, at first glance, didn't feed them or protect them? Some archaeologists suggest the answer is belief, a shared mythology powerful enough to unite scattered tribes. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was a place of ritual, a sanctuary where people came not for shelter, but for connection with forces greater than themselves. The carvings of animals may not be random decoration, but sacred symbols, each with meaning in their cosmology. A vulture might represent the passage of the soul into the afterlife. A serpent could embody death or rebirth. To stand in those circles might have been to stand in a story, one etched into stone, a myth retold without words. Others argue that Göbekli Tepe was more than just ritual. It may have been the birthplace of something larger, organized society itself. To build such a site, people needed to gather, to plan, to share food and labor. This cooperation could have created bonds that led to the first permanent communities. In other words, instead of agriculture leading to temples, maybe temples led to agriculture. The need to feed the workers, to sustain the gatherings, could have sparked the cultivation of wheat in the nearby Fertile Crescent. In fact, genetic studies of ancient grains show that wild wheat was first domesticated in the very region surrounding Göbekli Tepe. Was it a coincidence? Or was the world's first temple also the spark of the world's first farms? What makes the mystery deeper is that Göbekli Tepe wasn't just used for a short while. It was expanded, rebuilt, and reshaped over centuries. Each generation seemed to add their own circle, their own carvings, before finally, and most curiously, burying the entire complex under layers of earth. That's right. Sometime around 8000 BC, the people who had worshipped there deliberately covered the site. Was it an act of reverence, preserving it for eternity? Or was it abandonment, a ritual closure to mark the end of an era? The truth remains buried with them. Standing at Göbekli Tepe today, the silence is haunting. The stones rise out of the dust, weathered by time, but the carvings are still visible, as sharp as the questions they provoke. Every pillar whispers of hands long gone, of minds that imagined something greater than survival. And as you look around, the same thought comes back. 12,000 years ago, someone, some group, stood here, and with stone tools and determination reached for the sacred. Who were they? How did they live? And what did they believe so strongly that they would reshape an entire hill to honor it? As we peer deeper into the enigma of Göbekli Tepe, one detail becomes unavoidable: the artistry. These weren't crude etchings hacked into stone by amateurs. The carvings are smooth, deliberate, often layered with depth and perspective. Predators like lions and leopards prowl across the surfaces, snakes coil in threatening postures, while vultures stretch their wings wide. On some pillars you can find human-like arms carved along the sides, suggesting that these T-shapes might represent stylized human figures, guardians or gods, standing watch over the sacred circle. If that interpretation is correct, Göbekli Tepe was more than stone and ritual. It was populated by stone giants, embodiments of myth standing silent through the ages. But this only adds to the puzzle. Who taught these people how to sculpt with such skill? Where did the techniques come from? According to mainstream archaeology, advanced carving only appears much later, with bronze chisels and metalworking cultures. Yet, here we see mastery thousands of years too soon. Was it simply the brilliance of early artisans now forgotten? Or does it hint at an older tradition, one stretching back further than we dare imagine? Some fringe theorists leap at this gap and declare lost civilization. They argue that Göbekli Tepe is evidence of an advanced culture wiped out at the end of the last ice age, survivors of a flood, perhaps, or refugees of cataclysm passing on their knowledge before disappearing. It's an idea popularized in books and documentaries, but one that mainstream scholars resist, pointing out that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Still, even the most conservative researchers admit the builders of Göbekli Tepe shattered our expectations. What we do know is that building Göbekli Tepe required organization on a scale not seen anywhere else in that era. Think of what's needed: quarries, laborers, stone carvers, planners, ritual leaders, cooks to feed the workers, hunters to supply food. This was not a random effort, it was coordinated. It was society in motion. And if we follow that thread, the conclusion becomes even more provocative. Perhaps myth and belief are not byproducts of civilization. Perhaps they are the very foundation of it. Let's step into their world for a moment. The last ice age had only recently ended. The climate was warming, the glaciers retreating, the land transforming. Game was abundant, wild grains grew thick in the valleys, rivers surged with fresh water. Human groups were scattered across the land, tied to seasonal migrations, but also beginning to meet more often, drawn together by ritual and gathering places. Imagine tribes converging on this hill, bringing offerings, retelling stories under the stars, feasting and mourning, celebrating and remembering. In those moments of unity, perhaps leaders emerged, myths solidified, and the idea of we grew stronger than the idea of me. Göbekli Tepe may have been the stage where humanity first began to think collectively, beyond the clan, beyond survival. If so, then this hilltop sanctuary isn't just old, it is the birthplace of a way of being human. And then there is the act of burying it. Few things are more haunting than the deliberate concealment of Göbekli Tepe. The builders did not abandon it to the wind. They entombed it, shoveling in tons of earth, layer after layer, until the temples disappeared beneath the hill. Why? Was it a ritual closure, the symbolic death of a sacred site? Did they believe the spirits needed to be sealed away? Or was it protection, preserving something too important to be left exposed? Whatever the reason, it worked. For nearly 10,000 years, the world forgot, and only in the late 20th century did the Earth finally give up its secret. Today, as archaeologists continue to excavate, only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been revealed. Ground-penetrating radar shows dozens more stone circles waiting underground, untouched. What we see now may be only the tip of a vast complex, a prehistoric city of faith stretching across the hillside. Each new season promises more discoveries, and with each discovery, more questions. Standing there under the Turkish sun, the silence presses in. You realize that the people who built this place lived in a world unimaginably different, yet hauntingly familiar. They hunted, they gathered, they feared, they dreamed. They looked at the stars and wondered about their place in it all. And somehow, they chose to carve their questions into stone, leaving us a riddle that still defies answers. And so the question sharpens. Who, exactly, were the builders of Göbekli Tepe? Archaeology gives us only fragments. Stone tools, flint blades, and animal bones scattered around the site suggest bands of hunter-gatherers. No evidence of pottery, no signs of metal, no traces of settled villages have been uncovered in direct association. To the conventional eye, this points to a society without the trappings of what we call civilization, yet the stones tell another story, a story of vision, cooperation, and sacred purpose. Some scholars imagine seasonal gatherings. Tribes from across the region might have trekked to the hill at certain times of year, converging in massive feasts. Excavations reveal mountains of animal bones, gazelle, aurochs, deer, and birds consumed in quantities far beyond what a small group could eat. These were not just meals, they were celebrations, communal acts of devotion. In the glow of firelight, under the carved eyes of stone beasts, the people may have sung, danced, and enacted rituals whose meanings are now lost. In such gatherings, bonds were forged, alliances formed, and perhaps even the seeds of culture itself were planted. Others propose that Göbekli Tepe was a necropolis, a place of death and remembrance. The vulture carvings suggest sky burials, where bodies were left for birds to consume, a practice known in later cultures. If true, these circles may have been more than temples. They were portals, connecting the living to the spirits of the dead. To stand inside one was to stand on the threshold of worlds, where hunters became ancestors and myths became memory. Whatever its purpose, the sheer audacity of Göbekli Tepe forces us to reconsider our ancestors. They were not primitive wanderers fumbling in the dark. They were thinkers, builders, and believers. They stood on a hill, thousands of years before the pyramids, and declared in stone that they were here, that their lives had meaning beyond the hunt. That message crosses the millennia and lands with force today. And yet, after centuries of use, the builders covered their masterpiece. We don't know if it was fear, reverence, or necessity, but in that act, they preserved it better than any monument left exposed. They ensured that their work would one day astonish their descendants, though I doubt they could have imagined us. Modern humans, flying across oceans, watching glowing screens, yet still bewildered by the stones they raised. When you stand at Göbekli Tepe now, you feel the weight of those millennia. The wind whistles across the barren land, carrying dust and whispers. The pillars cast long shadows, silent guardians of a forgotten faith. You can almost hear the chants of people long gone, smell the smoke of their fires, feel the tremor of their drums in your chest, and in that moment, the distance between past and present collapses. You are no longer a visitor. You are part of the same human story, a story of wonder, belief, and the eternal urge to reach beyond survival into meaning. Göbekli Tepe remains one of the greatest mysteries of our world, not because we lack answers, but because every answer opens new questions. Did temples inspire farming? Did rituals spark civilization? Were these pillars the work of ordinary humans pushing the limits of possibility, or echoes of something even older? The truth may never be complete, but maybe that is the point. Maybe Göbekli Tepe was built not to give answers, but to remind us of the questions. And so we return to where we began, staring at the hill, staring at the stones, staring at the carvings of beasts and spirits. 12,000 years ago, people we call primitive carved their dreams into pillars and raised them toward the sky. They left no names, no books, no clear message, only stone, only silence, only the riddle that echoes still. Who built Göbekli Tepe and why? When Klaus Schmidt first arrived at the lonely mound known as Göbekli Tepe in the mid-1990s, the site looked utterly unremarkable. To the untrained eye, it was just another barren hill rising above the dusty plains of southeastern Turkey. Farmers had plowed the surrounding fields for generations, sometimes striking stone fragments and ancient flints, but no one imagined that beneath the hill lay one of the greatest archaeological treasures in history. Schmidt, however, had a feeling. He had worked on nearby sites before and knew the land was heavy with prehistory. When he picked up the first carved stone fragment from the surface, his instincts told him this was no ordinary ruin. The excavation began modestly, a trench here, a careful scrape there. Within weeks, Schmidt's team uncovered something extraordinary. A massive T-shaped pillar rising out of the soil, carved from a single block of limestone. As they dug deeper, more pillars appeared, arranged in circles like the ribs of some ancient skeleton. At the center of each circle stood two enormous monoliths, taller than the rest, like guardians towering over the space. The sheer size was staggering. Some pillars more than 16 feet tall, weighing as much as 20 tons. How could Stone Age people, armed with nothing more than flint tools, have shaped and raised them? But it wasn't just their size that shocked the team. As the dirt fell away, intricate carvings began to emerge. Reliefs of animals came alive on the pale stone, foxes slinking across the surface, boars charging forward, vultures spreading their wings, snakes writhing in twisting patterns. Each image was sharp and deliberate, not the crude scratches of amateurs. These were masterworks, art carved in an age when humans were supposed to be barely more than nomads. Schmidt realized instantly, this site would upend everything we thought we knew about human history. The dating confirmed his suspicions. Radiocarbon analysis placed the construction of Göbekli Tepe around 9600 BC, more than 12,000 years ago. This was thousands of years before Stonehenge, long before the pyramids of Egypt. Even before agriculture took root in the Fertile Crescent, it was as if someone had dropped a cathedral into the Stone Age. Archaeologists had always believed that temples and monumental architecture came after farming and cities, as the crowning achievements of complex societies. Yet here was proof of the opposite. Before the first wheat was planted, before the first village was built, people gathered on this hill and raised pillars toward the sky. The site itself was unlike anything else. More than 20 stone circles, or enclosures, lay buried under the hill. Only a handful have been fully excavated, but ground-penetrating radar reveals many more waiting beneath the soil. Each enclosure contained between 12 and 20 pillars, set in circular or oval arrangements. In the center, the twin giants dominated the space, perhaps representing deities or ancestors. Around them, the smaller pillars formed a kind of wall, as if enclosing a sacred arena. Archaeologists believe the site was never meant to be lived in. No homes, no hearths, no signs of everyday life. It was a place set apart, a sanctuary for rituals, a theater of belief. And then there was the most haunting detail of all. Göbekli Tepe had been buried. Sometime around 8000 BC, long after its construction, the people who had built and used it deliberately covered the enclosures with earth and rubble. They entombed their masterpiece, preserving it beneath the hill for millennia. This was not accidental. Layer after layer of fill was packed in, sealing the circles like time capsules. Why? Was it a final ritual, closing the site forever? Was it reverence, an attempt to preserve what was sacred? Or had something changed in their world that made Göbekli Tepe no longer needed? Whatever the reason, their act of burial protected the site until modern archaeologists uncovered it once more. To walk among the excavated circles today is to step into another reality. The pillars rise from the ground like stone guardians, their surfaces etched with symbols we cannot fully understand. Some scholars see a bestiary of local animals, leopards, wild asses, scorpions, and birds. Others suspect hidden meanings, a symbolic language that predates writing. One carving shows a headless man beside vultures, perhaps an image of death and the afterlife. Another shows snakes encircling a fox, a scene that may represent myth or warning. Each stone is a page in a book whose words we cannot yet read. And this is only a fraction of what lies beneath. Radar scans suggest that as little as 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered. Beneath the soil lie dozens more circles, each potentially as rich and complex as those we already see. The scale boggles the mind. This was not a single temple built in one generation, but a project spanning centuries, perhaps even 1,000 years. Generation after generation returned to the hill, carved new stones, built new enclosures, and buried the old. Göbekli Tepe was not just a site, it was a tradition. What makes the discovery so electrifying is not just its age or its artistry, but what it implies about the people who built it. According to the old model of human history, people first developed farming, then villages, then cities, and only then had the resources to build temples. Religion, in that view, was the byproduct of civilization. But Göbekli Tepe turns that order upside down. Here, it seems belief came first. People gathered to build temples, and only afterward developed farming to sustain those gatherings. Religion, not agriculture, may have been the spark that created civilization. For archaeologists, it was a revelation. For the rest of us, it was a reminder that the past is never as simple as we think. Our ancestors were not primitive wanderers stumbling blindly toward progress. They were dreamers, organizers, artists, and builders capable of extraordinary feats long before the textbooks say they should have been. One of the most astonishing things about Göbekli Tepe is the sheer craftsmanship of its builders. The limestone pillars, quarried from the bedrock of the hill itself, were not just dragged into place. They were shaped with precision. Archaeologists have identified unfinished pillars still lying in the quarries, some even larger than the ones erected. One such block is estimated to weigh over 50 tons, a colossus that was never completed. Just the attempt tells us something crucial. These people were not afraid to push limits. They tested themselves against the impossible, and they succeeded. Each pillar was set into sockets carved directly into the bedrock floor, ensuring stability. The arrangement of the circles suggests careful planning, with symmetry and alignment that required not only brute force, but also an understanding of geometry. How could Stone Age hunters and gatherers manage this? The easy answer is, we don't know. But perhaps the better answer is, humans are always more ingenious than we give them credit for. Necessity drives invention, but so does belief. If the builders were convinced they were raising the house of the gods, they would have found the means, however difficult. The artwork deepens the sense of mystery. Look closely at the carvings. They are not random doodles, but purposeful compositions. On one pillar, a fox slinks beneath a series of abstract symbols. On another, vultures surround a headless human body. Some stones feature strange, almost alien-looking creatures, composite forms that may be part human, part animal. What stories were being told here? Scholars debate endlessly. Some say it is the earliest form of mythology, a Stone Age Bible carved in rock. Others argue it is a symbolic code, a language of pictures that predates writing by thousands of years. A few even see astronomical references, constellations frozen in stone. The truth may be all of these, or none. One theory gaining traction is that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a kind of regional pilgrimage site. Hunter-gatherer groups from across the Fertile Crescent may have traveled long distances to gather here, to participate in shared rituals that unified them. Evidence of large-scale feasting supports this idea. Archaeologists have uncovered grinding stones for preparing vast quantities of grain and bones from thousands of animals, suggesting communal meals far larger than any single band could consume. Imagine the scene. Fires blazing, hundreds of people gathered, smoke rising into the night sky, the carved beasts around them lit by flickering light. The atmosphere would have been electric, charged with belief and belonging. But Göbekli Tepe was more than spectacle. It was also continuity. The site shows evidence of rebuilding and renewal across generations. As one circle was buried, another was erected nearby, larger and more complex. This pattern suggests an evolving tradition, passed from parent to child, elder to youth. Whatever mythology was carved into the stones, it was powerful enough to endure for centuries. That persistence is telling. People don't pour centuries of labor into something unless it matters deeply. And then, almost as mysteriously as it began, it ended. Around 8000 BC, the builders buried the site under tons of earth and rubble. It wasn't destroyed by invaders or swallowed by disaster. It was entombed deliberately, as though its time had passed. Was it reverence, a desire to preserve what was sacred? Was it fear, an attempt to lock something away? Or was it transition, the community moving into a new era, with new beliefs, leaving the old behind? We can only guess. Yet their act had a consequence they could never have foreseen. It preserved Göbekli Tepe for us, intact, a time capsule of the Stone Age. The modern discovery of this site sent shockwaves through archaeology. For decades, Göbekli Tepe was ignored or underestimated. In the 1960s, surveyors noted some unusual stone fragments, but assumed they were medieval gravestones. It took Schmidt's vision to realize that this was something older, something far beyond expectations. His insight changed the story of human history. Suddenly, the neat timeline, farming first, temples later, collapsed. Suddenly, religion and belief became not the byproducts, but the engines of civilization. Think of what that means. If Göbekli Tepe is truly the world's first temple, then it was religion, not agriculture, that first brought people together on a massive scale. It was faith, not farming, that built the first monumental architecture. And in that sense, Göbekli Tepe is not just a site in Turkey. It is the birthplace of the human imagination, the place where myth and ritual began shaping our shared destiny. As excavations continued, more secrets emerged. Beneath the layers of soil, archaeologists uncovered smaller enclosures, less monumental than the great circles, but no less intriguing. These later structures seemed rougher, less refined, as though the tradition of carving and raising massive pillars was slowly fading. Some scholars interpret this decline as evidence of transition. By 8000 BC, farming was taking root in the Fertile Crescent. Perhaps the communities that once poured their energy into ritual gatherings now redirected it toward cultivating crops and domesticating animals. The age of hunters gathering for faith was ending, and the age of farmers building villages was beginning. Göbekli Tepe may have been both the climax of one era and the birth pangs of another. Still, what has already been uncovered is staggering. The enclosures excavated so far, labeled by archaeologists as Enclosure A, B, C, and D, each contain unique features. Enclosure D, the largest and best preserved, holds two central pillars nearly 18 feet tall. Their broad T-shaped tops loom above the circle, as if embodying gods or ancestors. The surrounding stones feature a dizzying array of animals: wild boars, foxes, cranes, snakes, and more. Each enclosure feels like its own chapter, perhaps dedicated to a particular myth or clan, woven together into the tapestry of the site as a whole. One carving in particular has fueled endless debate. Known as the vulture stone, it depicts vultures standing above headless human figures, alongside abstract symbols including orbs and shapes that some interpret as celestial. To some researchers, this is a clear ritual of death and transformation, the soul carried skyward by the vulture, the body left behind. To others, it may represent astronomical knowledge, a prehistoric record of the stars. A few fringe voices even suggest it encodes a memory of a cataclysm, perhaps a comet strike at the end of the Ice Age. Whether myth, sky, or memory, the vulture stone proves one thing. These were people who thought deeply about life, death, and the cosmos. And this is only what we have uncovered so far. Ground surveys reveal dozens more circles still buried. Imagine what lies beneath, waiting. More carvings, more mysteries, more windows into a forgotten world. Göbekli Tepe is not a single puzzle to be solved, but an entire library still hidden underground. Each excavation season uncovers a few more pages, but the book remains largely closed. The significance cannot be overstated. Before Göbekli Tepe, we imagined early humans as small, scattered bands, struggling daily just to survive. After Göbekli Tepe, that image shattered. Here we see proof that people 12,000 years ago could organize, cooperate, and dream on a scale that rivals anything in later ages. They were capable of artistry, architecture, and perhaps even astronomy, all without the tools and systems we associate with civilization. And so, every stone circle, Every carved animal, every buried layer, forces us to rewrite our story. We used to think that farming led to temples. Now we must consider the opposite, that temples led to farming. That belief, not necessity, was the force that first bound people together. Göbekli Tepe, then, is not just the world's oldest temple. It is the spark that lit the fire of human civilization. When you stand there today, wind whipping across the hilltop, you can see the outlines of the enclosures against the dusty earth. You can see the carvings, still crisp after 12 millennia, as if the artists had just put down their tools. And you realize that you are looking not at ruins, but at beginnings. This is where it started. The story of us, the story of belief, the story of civilization itself. When we ask the question, who built Göbekli Tepe? We are not simply asking about a group of Stone Age workers dragging rocks up a hill. We are really asking about the minds behind it, the society, the culture, the world view that could conceive of such a place. To stand among those pillars is to realize that the builders were not anonymous laborers, but visionaries. So, who were they? The most widely accepted theory is also the most astonishing, that Göbekli Tepe was built by ordinary hunter-gatherers. These were not farmers with surplus crops or kings commanding armies of workers. They were mobile groups of foragers, moving with the seasons, carrying only what they could on their backs. Yet somehow these scattered bands united to carve, haul, and raise stones weighing as much as a truck. If this is true, it means the image we have of hunter-gatherers as simple, survival-driven nomads is incomplete. They were capable of organizing on a scale we never imagined. Archaeological evidence supports this. The tools found at Göbekli Tepe are flint blades, chisels, and hammerstones, the typical toolkit of late Stone Age foragers. No bronze, no iron, no wheels, no beasts of burden. Yet these tools were enough to cut into limestone and shape towering monoliths. Traces of fire pits, animal bones, and grinding stones suggest that large groups gathered here for feasting. This was not the work of a single tribe, but of many groups converging, perhaps for seasonal rituals. For weeks, maybe months, they would live on the hilltop, build together, worship together, and then disperse back into the wild. Göbekli Tepe may have been their anchor point, the sacred heart that bound scattered peoples into something larger. Still, the scale of the site raises questions. How did they feed so many workers? Hunting and gathering can sustain small groups, but large gatherings require vast amounts of food. Archaeologists have found evidence of brewing, stone troughs that may have been used to ferment grain into beer. If true, Göbekli Tepe may have hosted some of the world's first feasts fueled by alcohol, an intoxicating incentive for cooperation. Imagine the draw. Come to the hill, join the rituals, eat, drink, and carve your place in the sacred stones. Religion, celebration, and necessity all rolled into one. But some scholars argue that this explanation still isn't enough. Could scattered bands of foragers really organize such a complex project over centuries? Perhaps the builders were something more, an early form of organized society, not yet cities, but larger, more permanent communities than we once assumed. In this view, Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated miracle, but the product of a broader cultural network. The Fertile Crescent was rich with wild grains and animals ripe for domestication. Maybe these people were already experimenting with cultivation, already on the cusp of farming, and their gatherings at Göbekli Tepe accelerated that process. The temple may not have been a sudden leap, but the flowering of a society already in transition. And then there are the voices that push further, beyond conventional archaeology. To them, Göbekli Tepe is too advanced, too early, too perfect, to be explained by hunter-gatherers alone. They argue that it points to a lost civilization, a culture wiped out at the end of the last ice age, survivors who passed on their knowledge to the people of Anatolia. The timing fits neatly with the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to cold climate around 2800 BC, possibly triggered by a comet impact or massive flooding. To those who believe in forgotten chapters of human history, Göbekli Tepe is the smoking gun. Mainstream scholars dismiss this as speculation without evidence. No ruins of advanced cities, no traces of metal or writing, no artifacts beyond what we see. But even skeptics admit that Göbekli Tepe feels out of place. It is a leap in complexity with no clear precedent, a sudden flowering of architecture and art that seems to appear from nowhere. Whether this leap was homegrown genius or inherited knowledge, it forces us to admit that our ancestors were far more capable than we once believed. Another theory about the builders of Göbekli Tepe focuses not just on who they were, but why they built it. Some scholars believe the site was less about gods and more about people. In this view, Göbekli Tepe was a meeting ground, a place where scattered tribes came together to negotiate, share knowledge, trade, and cement alliances. The massive pillars and carvings were not just sacred symbols, but markers of identity, proof of unity, carved in stone. Imagine tribes gathering from hundreds of miles away, each bringing their own stories, rituals, and symbols, then merging them into the great communal canvas of the temple. The act of building may have been as important as the rituals performed afterward. If that's true, Göbekli Tepe represents the first stirrings of society itself. Before kings, before nations, before cities, there was a hill where people decided to work together for something larger than themselves. In the sweat and stone of Göbekli Tepe, we may be witnessing the birth of collective identity, the moment humanity stepped beyond survival into culture. But let's not underestimate the challenge. To quarry, transport, and erect 20-ton stones requires not only manpower but leadership. Who led the builders? There are no signs of kings or rulers here, no palaces or thrones. Perhaps leadership was fluid, shared among elders, shamans, or charismatic figures. Or perhaps the true leader was belief itself, a shared vision powerful enough to command loyalty without force. If everyone agreed the gods demanded a temple, then no king was needed. The gods themselves gave the orders. This is where Göbekli Tepe challenges us most. It suggests that people didn't need kings or states to build monumental works. They needed only belief, cooperation, and imagination. That idea is unsettling because it hints that the roots of civilization may lie not in power, but in story. And then there's the matter of the carvings. Who were the artists who transformed blank limestone into living myth? Were they specialists, revered artisans traveling from tribe to tribe? Or were they ordinary hunters and gatherers, teaching one another the craft? The consistency of style across the site suggests training, perhaps even apprenticeship. Could there have been schools of art in the Stone Age, hidden in the shadow of Göbekli Tepe? We may never know, but the stones whisper of skilled hands and dedicated minds. Of course, the most controversial voices go further still. To them, Göbekli Tepe is evidence of advanced knowledge lost to time. They point to the precision of the carvings, the alignment of the circles, the sheer ambition of the site. They ask, did these builders inherit wisdom from an earlier, forgotten civilization destroyed in the floods of the Ice Age? Or, as fringe theories dare to suggest, was there outside influence, knowledge from beyond the Earth? To mainstream archaeologists, such ideas are fantasy. But for many, the mystery of Göbekli Tepe is too profound to ignore, and speculation rushes in where evidence is silent. Yet, perhaps the truth is simpler and more awe-inspiring. Maybe it really was built by ordinary people, Stone Age men and women, who looked at their world and felt the same wonder we feel today. They saw death and dreamed of an afterlife. They saw the stars and wondered at their meaning. They saw animals and wove them into myth. And in that wonder, they carved stone, raised pillars, and created something eternal. The miracle of Göbekli Tepe may not be lost civilizations or alien visitors, but the timeless creativity of humanity itself. So, who built Göbekli Tepe? Hunter-gatherers, yes. Dreamers, definitely. People who believed in something greater than themselves, who gave shape to their myths in stone. In the end, maybe the question is not who, but why. And the answer to that may lie not in the stones alone, but in the shared heartbeat of humanity across time. The need to believe, to belong, to build. If we look closer, the question of who built Göbekli Tepe takes us deep into the psychology of early humanity. Picture a group of foragers, their lives bound to the seasons. They know where the gazelle herds migrate, when the wild grains ripen, when the rivers flood. Their world is fragile, uncertain, but also filled with mystery. They bury their dead. They dream of spirits. They tell stories around fire. Now, imagine the moment when one elder, one visionary, points to the hill and says, "Here, we will carve our story into the earth." That spark of imagination might have been enough to gather dozens of clans together. Archaeologists have found clues that these builders may have been united not just by ritual, but by survival itself. Genetic studies suggest that wheat was first domesticated in the region surrounding Göbekli Tepe. Was it coincidence or cause? Perhaps the gatherings demanded more food than hunting alone could provide, pushing people to cultivate grain. If so, then the builders of Göbekli Tepe were also the inventors of farming, shaping not only pillars of stone, but the future of human society. In that sense, the answer to who built it is the first farmers, the first dreamers of permanence. And yet, the burial of the site reminds us that nothing lasts forever. Around 8000 BC, after centuries of use, the people of Göbekli Tepe deliberately entombed their temple. Why would they do such a thing? Some suggest a shift in culture. As farming villages grew, the old rituals were no longer needed. Others believe it was reverence, a way of closing the site as one might close a holy book. Still others wonder if fear played a role, if something about Göbekli Tepe became too dangerous, too powerful to leave exposed. Whatever the reason, the act preserved the site for us, sealing the builder's identity in silence. So perhaps the real answer to who built Göbekli Tepe lies not in labels like hunter-gatherer or lost civilization. Perhaps the builders were us, human beings in the rawest sense, driven by the same forces that still shape us today: wonder, fear, faith, and the desire to leave something behind. We name them Stone Age, but the stones themselves reveal minds as sharp and restless as our own. Standing there today, among the excavated circles, the wind tugging at your clothes, you cannot help but feel their presence. The pillars are not ruins. They are voices. They are the fingerprints of hands, long gone, stretched across 12,000 years to remind us of who we are. And in the end, when we ask who built Göbekli Tepe, maybe the best answer is simple: humans did. Not gods, not aliens, not forgotten super civilizations, just people, people like us, who looked at the world, felt its mystery, and chose to carve their questions into stone. And perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not strangers. They were our ancestors. They were us. When you walk among the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, it is impossible not to feel the weight of meaning pressing down from every stone. These were not built as shelters, not as homes, not as fortresses. They were something else entirely, monuments of belief. And that is what makes Göbekli Tepe so profound. It is not only the world's oldest known temple, it is a window into the birth of human imagination. For centuries, historians thought they knew the order of things. First came survival, food, farming, villages. Only after that, once basic needs were secured, did humans develop religion, temples, and art. But Göbekli Tepe throws that neat ladder of progress into chaos. Here, 12,000 years ago, people built temples before farming, carved myths before cities, raised pillars before kings. It suggests that belief was not a byproduct of civilization, but its foundation. The need to gather, to worship, to tell stories bigger than ourselves may have been the glue that bound humans into something greater. This changes everything. It means the urge to believe, to imagine gods, spirits, and meanings beyond the visible is not a luxury of advanced societies. It is woven into us, as essential as food or fire. Göbekli Tepe shows that long before we could write, we carved. Long before we could build houses of brick, we built houses for the sacred. Long before we could farm the land, we farmed the imagination. And what did these builders believe? The carvings give us glimpses. Predators loom large, lions, leopards, and snakes. Vultures stand above headless men. These images speak of death, of danger, of the thin line between life and the unknown. But they also speak of order. By carving their fears into stone, the builders gave shape to chaos. They took the wildness of the world, the predators, the darkness, the mystery, and captured it within circles of stone. In that act, they transformed fear into meaning. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was a place where people came to face the mysteries of existence, life, death, the spirit, the stars. Perhaps it was where they sought connection to forces larger than themselves, to ancestors, to gods. Whatever its purpose, its scale and longevity tell us one thing: it mattered deeply. For over 1,000 years, generation after generation returned to this hill to add new circles, carve new symbols, and participate in a tradition that bound them together. And then, when its time was done, they buried it. That act may be the most meaningful of all. By entombing Göbekli Tepe, they preserved their work, ensuring that it would endure long after they were gone. Was this intentional? A gift to the future? Or was it ritual closure, sealing away the sacred as one era gave way to another? Either way, their choice means that today, 12,000 years later, we can stand among their stones and feel their presence. The meaning of Göbekli Tepe goes beyond archaeology. It forces us to confront what it means to be human. For a long time, we assumed that survival drove our ancestors, that art and myth were luxuries born only after hunger was tamed. But the stones of Göbekli Tepe whisper a different truth. That imagination itself is survival. The ability to unite around a story, to gather under a shared vision, may have been the first technology that allowed us to thrive. Think of what it takes to build such a place. You need more than muscle. You need purpose. You need more than tools. You need meaning. Belief gave them that. Belief was the invisible force stronger than ropes or levers, the thing that convinced dozens, maybe hundreds, of people to carve their fears and hopes into limestone and to stand shoulder to shoulder raising stones to the sky. In this way, Göbekli Tepe is less about gods and more about us. It is the story of humanity discovering the power of collective imagination. And that imagination may have changed the course of history. Consider this: to gather so many people for so long, you need food. Hunting alone may not have been enough. Archaeologists suspect that the feasts at Göbekli Tepe drove people to cultivate wild grains, laying the groundwork for agriculture. In other words, the desire to worship together may have created farming itself. Religion, not hunger, may have been the mother of agriculture. That flips our history upside down. It means civilization was not born in the field, but on the hill, not in the plow, but in the pillar. The implications ripple outward. If belief and story were the spark that lit the fire of civilization, then we must rethink how we see our ancestors. They were not primitive. They were pioneers of the spirit, carving a path that would lead to cities, empires, and the world we inhabit today. They did not wait for kings to command them or for priests to write laws. They came together because the human heart craves meaning. In that sense, Göbekli Tepe is the earliest proof of something we still feel today: the hunger not just for bread, but for belonging, for transcendence, for something greater. And this is why Göbekli Tepe resonates with us so powerfully now. In a world of skyscrapers and satellites, we are still the same species that once gathered on a hilltop to carve our myths into stone. We still tell stories to unite us, still build monuments to what we believe, still bury our mysteries for future generations to find. The builders of Göbekli Tepe are gone, but their message endures. To be human is to seek meaning, and to seek it together. And so we come to the final layer of meaning. Göbekli Tepe is not simply a ruin, it is a mirror. When we look at those stones, we see not just the past, but ourselves. We see the same longing to explain the unexplainable, to give form to mystery, to find community in story. We see the same need to reach beyond survival and into the realm of the sacred. That is why Göbekli Tepe feels so hauntingly familiar. Though 12,000 years separate us, the hands that carved those vultures and lions might as well be our own. Archaeologists will continue to unearth circles, catalog carvings, and debate theories. They will argue about whether Göbekli Tepe was a temple, a burial site, or an ancient observatory. They will search for evidence of farming, of feasts, of rituals lost to time, and they will uncover more questions than answers. But perhaps the most important truth is not found in data, but in what the site makes us feel. Awe, wonder, connection, a sense that we are part of something vast and ancient, a story written not in books, but in stone. That is the legacy of Göbekli Tepe. It is not just the dawn of architecture or religion, it is the dawn of us, of humans as beings who dream, who believe, who build. It is proof that our ancestors were not defined by what they lacked, but by what they imagined. And in that imagination, they created the first sparks of civilization. So when we ask, who built Göbekli Tepe and why, the answer may never be fully known. But maybe that is the point. Maybe the mystery itself is the gift, a reminder that some questions are bigger than answers, that wonder is more powerful than certainty. The builders left us no names, no records, no explanations, only stone, silence, and symbols, only the echo of their faith across 12 millennia. And perhaps that is enough. For as long as those pillars stand, they will continue to speak, not in words, but in the universal language of wonder. And if we listen carefully, we will hear what they have always been saying, that to be human is to dream, to believe, and to leave behind something greater than ourselves. And so our journey through Göbekli Tepe comes to a close. We began with a hill in southeastern Turkey, a place that seemed ordinary until the earth gave up its secret. We walked among pillars older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older even than the first fields of wheat. We traced the hands of forgotten builders, hands that carved lions and vultures into stone, hands that raised monuments to mysteries we still cannot solve. And with every step, we realized that the people of 12,000 years ago were not primitive shadows of ourselves. They were us, dreamers, storytellers, believers. What Göbekli Tepe reminds us is that history is not a straight line. It is a tapestry of leaps and surprises, of forgotten truths buried in the soil. We thought farming created civilization, but perhaps it was faith. We thought survival alone defined our ancestors, but perhaps it was imagination. We thought we knew the story of humanity, but the stones on that hill whisper otherwise. And that is why Göbekli Tepe matters, not because it answers all our questions, but because it refuses to. It stands as a riddle carved in limestone, daring us to keep searching, to keep wondering, to keep rewriting what we think we know. So, as we leave the hilltop and the pillars fade into the dust, one question remains, echoing across 12,000 years. Who built Göbekli Tepe, and why? Maybe we will never know. Or maybe the answer has been with us all along, in our endless human need to believe, to belong, and to build something that lasts beyond our own fleeting lives. This was not just their story. It is ours, and it is far from over.